Good morning, one and all. Good day. Hello. Buongiorno. Bonjour. Guten Tag. Hello, world. Yes, welcome to my latest podcast. And butter my crumpets, as we say here in the UK. I'm very much looking forward to this podcast. I just realised I don't think I have a name for this podcast. So maybe we can call it the podcast with no name. You know, a bit of U2 in there. The podcast with no name. Don't worry, I'm not trying to kill you all off. So you're all probably all left now. Come back. But yes, I'm very much looking forward to this. An amazing guest, very inspirational. I think I've called it Inspirational People. And this man is a great inspiration because he was on the podcast back in May of last year. So he's coming back for more and he's going to share the updates and stuff. If you are looking to run a sub 220 marathon, this is your man because he's not only done it once or twice, he's done it 3 times so far and going for more. He is challenging the status quo, which I very much employ and do as well. So if you're looking to learn and enjoy and have a good time, then stick along to the very end. And we've got some bonus coming up at the end as well, some new exciting updates that our wonderful guests will be talking about. But if I played you this song from the 70s, for those of you old enough to remember the sweet rock and roll band, if I played you this song. Fox on the run. I ride away. Yes, Fox on the Run. It's none other than... Hold on. I pressed the wrong button there. Matt Fox, hello, welcome.
Thank you very much. I didn't see that song part coming, so that was very funny. But it's great to be back on the podcast. And, you know, we spoke, what was it, 4 months before Chicago Marathon,
That's
just
right.
as I was starting to, I guess, think about the marathon specific phase. And it's great to reconnect after 4 marathons, and as you said, a few in the bank of sub 220. So looking forward to talking about all that.
Absolutely, Matt. I'm so honoured to have you on. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for taking the time because I know you have a very busy schedule in terms of what's going on over the next few months. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights. So we've got to talk about, because when you were here back in May, you were, as you say, you were starting your marathon block. You'd had a number of attempts of trying to get under the 220. I think you said there was about maybe 8 attempts where you tried to get under 220. And I've got to say, maybe take a bit of applaud. A bit like when we first met face to face in real life back at the Telford 10K, where I think I got my lifetime PB of 37 minutes something. Not bad for a 60 something. But so I think the magic source, we could say, was it appearing on the podcast that gave you the impetus to get you under the 220, because not only did you do it in Chicago, you then went and done it again in Indianapolis, and then you went and done it again at the CIM, California International Marathon. 3 months, 3 two tub 20s. How? What happened, Matt?
I think it was just this podcast. I mean, ever since that podcast, everything just went perfectly with training and racing. So I think I got to keep doing these podcasts. I think, look, go for it.
You go, Matt.
I was just going to say that I think, you know, there was a few changes that I made this year, and I do remember us chatting, you know, in May about some of those, but one of them that was implemented sort of after we spoke about and closer to Chicago Marathon was something that many people shy away from talking about, and I don't shy away from it too much because I just see it as a part of running. But I will preface by saying that, you know, there is a mental health challenge to this particular thing. And so if you do have a history of, you know, anything in the eating disorder space, it's a little bit difficult to hear. And maybe I'd suggest moving forward a minute in the conversation. But I did proactively try and actually lose some weight leading into those marathons. And I think that was a pretty big deal for me personally. But there was a couple of other things that I did last year that really moved the needle forward for me, you know, speaking to the question that you're asking about how. And I think the main two outside of the losing of weight were doing very fast sprints, usually on a hill, and doing a little bit higher mileage. But it's interesting because a lot of people that follow my journey sort of believe that it was probably those two things that were the biggest factor. I think that they were probably second and third factors. You know, first one being the weight at which I was racing at. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you think the weight? I do recall, and you know, on the side, we'll go into, you know, fast hill sprints, higher mileage, and talk more specifically about the mileage. What kind of higher mileage would you say? What did you go from and to?
In the previous, well, I actually sort of rewind to the first time I broke 230, which was in 2019. And I was doing around about 140 to 150 kilometers a week leading into that 227 at Valencia 2019. So that would be around about 85 to 90 miles a week. And then when I ran 220 in 2021 at Indianapolis Marathon, the volume was much lower. And it was mostly because for a year and a half, I struggled pretty severely with Achilles tendinopathy. And I took 6 weeks completely off in May and June in 2021. And then I ran for 4 months and ran 220. And in those 4 months, I was quite conservative with the training because I didn't want my Achilles to come back. And so that was very eye-opening for me because I did about 70 miles a week. It was actually slightly less. It was about 68 on average in the 12 weeks leading into that 220. But the thing I noticed then was that I was very light when I ran 220 in 2021. And I didn't even try to get light. I just was light. It was probably as a result of being so busy with work and traveling. I just didn't eat enough. But then over the next 8 attempts, I was doing around about the same in all of them, about 90 miles, 145, 150 kilometers. Now, when I prepared for Chicago and then subsequently Indianapolis and CAM, I was probably closer to about 110 miles, about 175 to 180 kilometers. But it was only for about 4-5 weeks. So not a long time. And I believe that this is probably the smallest factor that moved the needle forward for me in the marathon, even though many probably believe that it's the biggest factor. But the people that think it's the biggest factor tend to be big mileage, pro mileage people. So it's funny.
The confirmation bias, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct. Whereas I think it helped for sure, but I think it was the least of the things that helped.
Right. So what was that number one thing do you think helped?
The body weight. So if I don't, I grew up trying to make the Australian Football League, and I was always around about 75, 76 kilos playing Australian football. And then when I moved to running, I would always sit around about, I was actually a little bit heavier than that. I was actually probably closer to 77, 78. And then when I moved to the 800 meters in my late teenage years and through my 20s, I would always sit around 74 kilos if I was just sort of eating normally and not really thinking about it. Same thing with the marathon career, about 73 to 74 kilos. And that would be if I'm training hard and I'm not thinking about what I'm eating. I'm just eating. I'm just sort of mindlessly eating. But then in Indianapolis, I was 70. So I was about 3.5, 4 kilos lighter than normal. But this year I've gone down to 69, so just below what I was at Indianapolis. And I've basically remained that since August this year, 69 kilos. And it's a big difference in training. And when you think about it, it's about 5%, maybe even more. It's about 6% of the body weight coming off. And, you only have to look at some basic physics equations to know that power to weight and these sorts of things, that 6% lighter, if you keep the power the same, is going to move quite a lot faster. And so, the reason why I haven't spoken a lot about this is because there is that triggering effect for some. And I understand that even though I haven't experienced that, I need to be respectful in that regard.
Yeah, I totally get it, Matt. And the power thing, I think cyclists are very much into that, where, with running, I know they have power meters that people talk about. I don't know how accurate it is, but on a bicycle, because it's a fixed wheel going round, you can directly measure it. And as the cyclist gets lighter, the power to weight ratio becomes even bigger on that. So I can definitely see the accuracies on that. Do you think, because one of the things that we did talk about, and I said it would help you mentioned about a group that you were going to be joining. Obviously, whilst you trained, do you think training with that group helped in terms of the faster hill sprints? I do recall, I got to ask you about the gloves, by the way, minus 10 degrees, one of your training runs the other day. So do you think training with the group helps in terms of your mileage, doing the fast bits and also more miles?
Yeah. I started training with a small group of guys. One guy is a 211 guy, Colin McCow. And I think it helped a little bit, but I was mostly only running with them once a week in the long run and not all the time. I had a little bit of a difficult time finding people that were the same level as me, because even Colin, he's a bit faster than me. So most of his paces are faster than mine. And I'm in a little bit of a dead zone in Chicago, strangely, because there's not a lot of people around 218. There's a couple much faster than me. It's only 2, of which one doesn't really race anymore. And then there's a lot at 224 to 235. And so there's actually not that many that run my pace. But I think it helped a little bit. But I actually got Reem, my wife, to ride the bike with me in most of the hard workouts that they couldn't join me on. And I learned, because she'd never really done that much before, but I learned that was sufficient for me to be able to push. It was basically good enough as in similar to having a group to work with, having her on the bike right in front of me. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I was going to say many congratulations, by the way, on getting married back
Mm.
in October, wasn't it? So
Mm.
you did mention on one of your posts to do a 220. I know you did put a little winky sign that one of the key things of running a sub 220 was to get married. So, I'm guessing there's a lot of, having the stress taken away. I mean, you did half joke, but sometimes I'm sort of the same also. If someone is there helping and supporting you and she's out with you on the bikes as well, that is like you're doing the events together, because often I hear of people where they're running at certain paces and times and they don't get to see their wives, husbands, partners, whereas you guys are working together on the same thing, which is brilliant. Yeah, so that must be an amazing factor as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the reason why I made that joke was because the wedding was 1 week before Chicago
Yeah.
Marathon. And then I think a lot of people went, wow, like he's gone 219 or 218s in a row. And it was right after the marriage. So like, the only thing that's changed, the people from the outside that didn't really look very closely, they thought he got married and then just went bang, bang, bang. But to me, it was obviously that has nothing to do with the marriage.
I know. It's I love those things though, Matt, because clearly, and obviously looking at your face there, it's some people might say, well, all Australians are always happy, smiling, but you are clearly, you're enjoying because right now you're not in Chicago, are you? You're in Arizona, is that right? And
that's right. Yes.
So Arizona, that's a bit of a change from Illinois. I don't know what the weather is like there right now, because I know in Illinois it's a bit nippy, shall we say?
Oh,
I'm guessing the temperature's a bit different in Arizona.
10 degrees plus Celsius here, and in Chicago, it's usually hanging around -10 to -15 at the moment. So,
wow,
very glad to be here right now. Yeah.
So a 25-degree difference, because you've now, since completing those 3 sub 220s. Notice how I nearly said 3 sub 3s, but 3 sub 220s. You then went back, so you've got a challenge going on now, which Yuki Kawachi. Have I pronounced his surname correctly?
Don't ask me, because every time I say it on YouTube videos, that people have a go at me in the chat, in the comments, saying, "Oh, at least pronounce his name correctly." So
yes.
I believe it's Kauchi, but every time I say it, I seem to have people have a swing. So I'm not super sure either, but I am inspired by him.
Well, I'm reading this here. I've written his name down, and he was running with me at Boston in 2018. I say running with me; he was like in the distance ahead of me.
I was about to say, did you come second?
Yeah, I was with the Kenyans, just behind the Kenyans, challenging him at about mile 12, I think it was. So Yuki Kawachi, amazing athlete, Japanese. I think the Japanese have a completely different culture to endurance running to the rest of the world. I did read a number of years ago, and I think some top elite runners told me that the Japanese have the fastest group of half marathon runners in the world, which is not difficult to believe because their culture is very different. I mean, the way Yuki won at Boston was incredible. I think he was the only one in a singlet. And I remember running that year. It was cold. It was gale force winds. It was sleet at the start. So it'd been snowing the day before. So we had snow. So it's freezing conditions. And he was there just in a singlet and shorts and giving it some. And the commentary, he was going out guns blazing. So he would be challenged in the status quo, but he went out and won. He's doing a particular challenge, and you're now taking on a similar challenge, or you say you've been inspired. Do you want to share with us what this challenge is? Because you've done 3 marathons in 3 months, and then you went on to do Houston. See, people are going to have a go at me how I pronounce certain words, like, is it Nike or Nike? But hey, it's Nikki. But Houston. Yeah. So you've done 4 marathons. Are you planning on doing a marathon every month? What's the challenge all about, Matt? Do you want to give us a bit of background and where it's going?
Yep. I became familiar with Yuki probably in about 2014. I don't remember exactly how I first was familiar with him, but when he won Boston, it became a lot more front of mind, right? Yeah. And then I added him on Facebook because at the time I wasn't really using it. This is 2017, 2018. Yeah. And I heard from somebody, and I can't remember who it was, that he posts a lot on Facebook, that he posts a lot of his training and his updates and his races. And I thought, oh, great, I'll follow him there. And I don't really use Facebook anymore, but at least at the time, for a few years, I was following all of his posts. He was posting 2 or 3 times a week, talking about his racing, and I thought to myself, this guy just is completely going against what everyone says is the right idea, like to do with marathon running. I thought, why is he doing that? And I noticed that, and at first it didn't really wasn't overly impressive to me. It was more just like, why is he doing this? And why is he not doing the traditional way? And then I noticed that he just started getting better and better and better over time. And it's important to note that he wasn't getting better in every race. He was getting better if you zoomed out over
Yeah.
the year, he was getting better gradually. He'd run, 2:15 and then 2:21, then 2:14, then 2:15, then 2:23. Maybe he'd have a bad weather day, and then he'd go 2:12, and he was getting faster and faster. And then when I started taking the marathon more seriously, and I would say that was probably in 2021, that was when I started to go, okay, maybe I can run close to an elite time, but let's just see how far I can get. One thing that really started to almost bother me over time, which I'm sure bothers many people listening that run marathons, is I started to get a little bit tired of the idea of doing this big build up, this 1 month rest or so on, and 4 or 5 months of speed and base and then marathon specific block. And then you turn up to the start line and it's like 20 degrees Celsius and
Yeah.
then 80% humidity. I'm
That's
like,
right.
man, like I had this goal of running under 220 and then the weather's just going to make it impossible. And that happened a few times. It didn't happen every time. Sometimes I got decent weather. But I just thought to myself, man, like you commit so much time and so much effort
Mhm.
into a goal. And I guess you could argue many people don't take it that seriously. So they turn up and just race in whatever
Yeah.
conditions they have available to me. But it started to frustrate me that I was like, if I had multiple attempts and I could back up and do it a few times, I think I would have a better shot at running faster. And then what I also noticed was after every marathon I did, I was recovering faster and faster to the point where
Mm.
I'd do an all out marathon and then maybe 8, 9 days later, I could do a hard workout and do it 100%. And so I
Yeah.
thought to myself, what am I missing? Like, why don't more people just race more frequently and don't do this long build up? Like, is it possible? And that thought was in my head for years. Like, I would say 2.5 or 3 years. And then I just kept seeing Yuki get better and better. Then he ran 2:07 last year before
Mhm.
last. And I think that was when I was like, oh man, this guy just keeps getting better and better. And he's not doing it the traditional way. And I thought, I'm going to do that at some point soon. And I just thought as soon as I ran Chicago, I had Indianapolis entered 1 month later, and I did that because Indianapolis is a 3-hour drive from
Yeah.
Chicago, so easy to get to. I thought Indianapolis is going to be my backup in case Chicago is warm or something goes wrong. And obviously in Chicago, I ran sub 220, I ran 219 for the first time, and then I ran Indianapolis and ran faster and felt really good at Indy. And then I just thought, why don't I just do this month to month thing starting right now? I had that thought like after Indianapolis Marathon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I had the CIM entry already. I entered that because I knew I could get into the elite field, and keeping in mind that there's a little bit of an advantageous thing when you get into these elite and sub elite fields is that you don't have to pay for it. You can enter and you
Mm.
get in the field and you can drop out late. Now I don't want to do that, but you can sort of enter just going like, well, I can decide later if I want to do it or not. It doesn't actually cost anything.
Yeah.
And so then I just did CIM and ran 219 again. And then I just thought, yeah, I'm going to commit to this, do one every month. But I have made it pretty publicly clear that if I get a small injury or illness that puts me out for a couple of weeks, I won't stick to the exactly one a month. But I do want to see if I can get faster and faster in the marathon over time by racing it just very frequently and almost using every marathon as a training block, as a training session to build on the last one and keep moving forward. So it's basically throwing the idea out about this big, long block race and see if I can do it more like how I raced the 800 meters, where I ran one like every few weeks. And then, yeah, I just want to see if that's possible.
Wow. I mean, it is challenging the norm because I think back in the day, if we were look back, it was like one marathon a year, and then
Mm,
they introduced because of commercialism and obviously sponsors and so on. So it then became two, so a spring and an autumn, and spreading it out. But obviously, a lot of these guys were running certain times. I mean, it is challenging the norm. How's it going so far? You did mention something with Houston having slightly slowed down, but they're all so close, within a
mm,
minute of each other. But to me, a minute is nothing in marathon. It's basically there could be a slight bit of wind, or you
yep.
might have dodged a pothole. If you ever watched a serious runner, he was at I think he was at Houston as well, and he done a list of excuses. I think he ran 2:57, and based on the wind, the potholes, starting in the wrong corral, I think he clocked an extra 15 minutes. So,
Mm.
a minute is nothing to you. So you're thereabouts and getting quicker. How is it going so far? How are you feeling? And what's the next one?
Mm. You're exactly right by saying one could a critic or a skeptical person could look at Houston and so for reference, we already talked about 219, 218, 219, October, November, December. In January, I ran 220.27, which is the slowest
Yeah.
of the four, but still within 2 minutes of my personal best.
Yeah.
And so a critic could say, oh, he's getting slower. I actually think Houston was equal to my best run. And I
Yeah.
say that because anyone that's run enough marathons, and especially someone that's trying to run as fast as they possibly can, would know that even, and you sort of already touched on this, would know that even the smallest of factors can quite drastically change the time.
Mm, mm.
So, and in Houston, out of the 4 marathons I've run in the last 4 months, Houston was by far the worst weather. Even though it was cold, which I like, it was extremely windy. But it wasn't that it was windy; it was more that it was very gusty.
Yeah.
And so every minute or two, there would just be this huge 30-mile-an-hour gust. And the way the marathon course was set up, we had an extremely gusty section between about 15K and 30K, or 14 miles and 18 miles. No, sorry, what would that be? 9 miles and 18 miles. And I think it was more of a mental challenge for me, because at the end of that really windy period, I was so sick of the race because I'd just been dealing with headwind for so long.
Yeah.
And I was also on my own a lot of that time. And, I sound like I'm just whinging and complaining, but anyone that's been there would know that if you're battling a headwind on your own for a long time, it starts to really dim your spirits after a while. And so
No,
I got to about, yeah. Have you had that
Go
before?
on. Go for it, Matt. Carry on, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that at about 20 miles, 19 miles, or 30K, around there, I just remember thinking to myself, I'm very sick of this race. I'm not sure if I'll even finish it. Maybe I won't bother. But then I remembered I promised myself in the last DNF that I had that I'm never going to DNF again unless I have an injury. So I thought, no, I'm going to see this out. And I set myself a goal at 20 miles to try and just break 220, because I knew what pace I was on for. At that point, it was about 219.30. And I thought, I'm going to try and break 220. And then, it wasn't meant to be. But, at the end of the day, out of the other 3 marathons I ran with a pack for the majority of the race. In Houston, I did almost no running with a pack. It was probably about maybe a quarter of the race with people, and the rest of it was just on my own. And partly that's my own fault, right? I'm not making excuses. It's actually just that I tactically maybe didn't run it very well. And so, I came off that thinking, right, my shape has definitely not gotten worse. It's probably remained the same from Chicago all the way through. And so now it's trying to figure out, how do I actually squeeze this 216 or maybe even 215 out that I believe is in the body? It really has to be a case of almost everything going right. But I feel like, of all people that can try and pick a day that everything goes right, I have a high chance. Not because it's anything to do with me. It's because I'm spreading my bets so much over so many races. So hopefully it works out. Yeah.
You are totally spreading your bets. There's so many points there, Matt, I totally relate to. Being isolated is very psychologically draining. And the gusting winds, those who are listening and watching this podcast, if you don't understand, especially endurance running, I would say half marathon and beyond, when you're surging, which sometimes you unintentionally do when you're getting gusting winds, is your body is basically surging. That physically drains you as well. So, the top elite runners, that's how they race. They deliberately throw in surges to knock off the competition, because they know that's the quickest way to drain the competition. So basically you were being drained as each wind would hit you. And it's quite awful. Whatever mile it is, whether it's mile 1 or mile 21, when it hits you, it's like psychologically. And there's a book coming out, Steve Magnus, wonderful writer, and he talks about the psychology. And I'm reading the book Endurance, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well, where it talks about the psychology of races, where our brains, how we cope and compete. But to be honest, I know, and I'm sure the next time you're back on the podcast, Matt, it will be 2:15. Whether it is this year or next year. But what are the races that you do have booked next? Because will you be racing in? So Houston was January. Have you got a race booked in February? Or will you?
I do, but it's a Saka marathon, 24th
Oh,
of February.
wow.
The challenge is, though, it's a bit of a weird challenge that most people wouldn't know about, and I'll keep it short because it's a bit boring. But I got married in October. We spoke about that, and I've applied for the green card. I applied for that even before the wedding because we could through the relationship that we had, and I haven't got that approved yet. Now that should have been approved either in December or January. That was the early notice we got. And the weird thing about these green cards, it's actually the same in Australia. I don't know about the UK, but you actually strangely can't leave the country until it's processed.
It's the same here in the UK, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really weird rule, and so I actually can't leave until that's processed. Now, I'll spare you the boring details, but it turns out I can get an emergency travel visa. It's not cheap, and something like I might have to get that if I want to make this race. And the only reason why paying the $680 for that visa is justified is that I actually won the trip to Osaka Marathon, so it's actually free. And how
Wow.
I won that was because in Chicago, I didn't know this until after the race. Chicago and Osaka have some sort of relationship, and
Yeah.
the first place finisher over the line at Chicago Marathon that is a resident in Chicago wins a trip to Osaka. Now, I was actually second across the line behind Colin McCow, who I spoke about, who I trained with,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
he declined it because he got an offer from Boston, and so then I was given the free trip to Osaka. So I have to pay $680 to leave the country, but then my flights and accommodation and race entry are free. So it sort
It's
of
yin
cancels
and
itself out.
yang. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost destiny. But yeah, the visa things, I'm totally familiar with that, Matt. I think there's certain visas here in the UK you have to apply outside the country, and you're not permitted inside the country until the visa's been approved. So you can't even apply in the country; you have to be outside the country. But yeah, as I say, we won't go through immigration rules in different parts
Yeah.
of the world. It does add to the flavour in that. But so Osaka, Japan, which is
Yep.
quite incredible. As I say, one day I'll be out in Japan, but
You gotta
February,
get there.
March. Have you got your calendar? What is your calendar? So March, April, May, June. Will you be racing through the summer months? Because I guess with the southern hemisphere, dare I say it, being an Australian, Sydney is in. Is it July, August,
I think Sydney's either in
or
August or September, but that's
or
not on my
September?
radar
No.
at the moment because, well, it's a major, it's sold out. I didn't get an entry, and plus, it's really hilly. I think
Yeah. But
at
there's
least
going to
at
be
least
events around the world where the climate should favour marathon racing. Yeah.
yeah.
So you'll
So
find some
at
to
the
get
end,
around.
yeah. So the draft plan is I haven't planned all the way through the year because I'm sort of seeing how it goes. But in March, I'm doing one in New York. It's a small race called the McCurdy Marathon. It's actually set up for elite runners. That
Okay.
there's a recreational marathon on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday there's 250 people that are you have to have run under 225 as a male. I think it's 240 as a female, and it's small loops with drink stations. So that's March.
Mhm.
April, I'm hopefully getting to Ballarat Marathon. A lot of the top Australian runners are all racing each other at a race just outside of Melbourne, and I'm keen to get in there because I've never run a marathon in Australia, and I'm obviously Australian, so I'd like to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
May I'm not sure about, but I feel like there might be one or two in the UK that are potential, and there's
Yes.
also
Yeah.
Stockholm.
Okay.
June, there's a good one here called Grandma's Marathon that's very
Yes.
popular
I've
in the
heard of
US.
grandma. Yeah.
Yeah, weird name, but it's very fast.
Yeah.
Uh, and then despite the name, and then in July I have Gold Coast Marathon, which I'm super excited about because that's my hometown. And
Wow.
I've watched Gold Coast Marathon many times, and I have an apartment, or at least my family has an apartment right at the 30K mark. And so that's the July plan. And then August, I'm racing the Helsinki Marathon, which is obviously going to be in summer, but Helsinki doesn't get very warm at all. In fact, the
Yes.
mornings are
Yeah.
still pretty cool in August. And I actually know the organization there quite well because I used to live in Helsinki for 4 years. So I know them quite well. So they've actually invited me out. And then
Wow.
after that, I haven't planned September
Yeah. Yeah.
onwards because I just want to see how we go. Yeah.
That is a proper international jet-setting lifestyle, isn't it, Matt? I mean, some of those locations, Gold Coast is on my list. Yeah, if you've got spare part, not this year, maybe next year or the year after.
Gold Coast is a very good one.
Yeah, a number of people have mentioned that to me. So there's a whole plethora out there, but it neatly leads us on to, because I wanted to ask you, myself being a bit of an international jet setter and worked in many countries around the world, for me, I wanted to ask you about this new venture that you're embarking on called Globe Runners. Because when I saw it, it talks about running, eating, and traveling. Is there anything more to life than that? Tell us more about Globe Runners, and that's probably why you're in Arizona right now, because it's going to be your first event. So please do, Matt. Tell us more about Globe Runners.
Well, Donato, I think for you, me, and everyone listening, there's probably not much more to life than those things. So that's what I've tried to make. And, we actually have run. So Globe Runners is all about doing experiences that involve running, eating, and traveling. And so we go to one particular location, or it might even be a couple of locations, but we go as a group and we do a lot of training, we do education, and we eat and we have fun. And we've actually done 6 of these training experiences. You can call them a training camp, you call them a training, trip through Sweat Elite brand in Kenya and Portugal. And the reason for launching a new company was over the last, probably more specifically 3 years, since we've done two in Kenya and one in Portugal, I've met people along the way at races and stuff that have been like, "Oh yeah, I've considered joining one of your Sweat Elite camps, but I figured I wasn't fast enough." I heard that, or a similar thing to that, quite a
Mm.
lot of times, and then it made me realize that having the name Sweat Elite under something that I'm promoting to recreational people to be included in is probably not the best branding. So
Yeah,
I took it out of Sweat Elite and named it Globe Runners, so that people didn't feel like they had to be an elite runner, because that's also
yeah,
a challenge that we have a little bit at our coaching company, which is called Sweat Elite Coaching Academy. A lot of people think they have to be very good runners, but they don't. They can be any level. And so it's sort of the same thing. And we've actually considered changing the coaching company name too, but we're sticking to it because it's working well. But
yeah,
with the experiences in general, we thought we had to make that change. So yeah, it's actually really no different to what we've been doing for a long time. It's just under a different brand, and we want to make them a little bit more inclusive now as well. So we just want to make sure they're 100% all inclusive. When people turn up, everything's taken care of. And as you said, I'm in Arizona on Friday. The first one under the Globe Runner's name begins, and it's a 4-day experience in Arizona where we go to Flagstaff, we go to Sedona, and the second one's in Boulder in April. So yeah, exciting. I've just come a few days earlier to see a friend that lives 2 hours away from where the experience is, but
yeah, yeah.
by car. So yeah, in Tucson, Arizona now, which is actually where a lot of the world's best
Wow.
triathletes live,
Yeah,
including Sam Long. So I might see him tomorrow. But yeah, plenty going on in the globe running space, and it's something I just love doing this, traveling around the world, meeting new people, guiding people, to a particular route in running, and obviously taking training sessions. It sort of combines all of my passions in one. So I'm really excited about it. So hopefully you can join one day, Donato.
well, I was going to say, where do I book? It sounds like you're living the dream. A lot of people talk of living the dream and traveling. I mean, the World Marathon Majors, that's one of the reasons why, they want people, I think why they included Sydney, and they're looking to add other countries to make it more global rather than just North American and European based. But it does sound bliss. But tell us, Matt, I was going to say, tell us what a typical 4-day would involve. Is it getting up early? Because I've been away on some of these weekends with some companies, and it's quite relaxed what you do. So whilst there's a schedule, you don't have to go out on all the runs or do all the sessions, But also, where I was, I don't think there'd be much sitting on the beach or somewhere nice as Portugal. But bleak England sometimes with wind and rain. What's a typical 4-day? What would people expect to be doing? I mean, you mentioned, is there going to be expert people? Obviously, there'll be yourself. Do you bring in some top world-class athletes, or is it coaches, nutrition?
Yeah.
What kind
So
of
we pick them up
food
from the
do you get
airport.
to eat? Yeah,
Airport pickup is included, and then accommodation will be included. All meals are included. So we typically supply breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then throughout the day, typically every day we'll have two training sessions, one being a running workout, another one being an optional run workout, and then some sort of either strength or dynamic
hmm
stretching, or some
hmm
sort of one percenter.
yeah,
Plyometrics we sometimes do as well. And then the day will also include at least one education session. It'll normally be run by myself, and sometimes I'll have either a professional athlete or a coach take those sessions as well. And so they're all focused on one particular thing. And so in this Arizona one, we have one seminar all about threshold training, one all about VO2 max training, one all about one percenters. So one percenters would mean, gym, stretching, diet, all of these
yeah,
things. And so, yeah, we have seminars focused on sort of all the different realms of running and training. And then outside of that, so everything that I mentioned there takes up around about 4 hours in a day, if that. And then
yeah,
the rest of the time, we do a lot of social activities. So we'll go explore a different place. When we were in Portugal earlier last year, we had a lot of British runners and Europeans on the trip. We pretty much every second day, we drove to another part of the Algarve and
mm,
we explored it. So we went to Faro one day, we went to Albufeira one day, and then Lagos, and then we also crossed the border into Spain. I can't remember the town name across the border, but we went there for a day,
yeah,
and yeah, it's a lot of fun. And the best part is people tend to. It's funny. I've actually one of the camps I took in 2019 has a WhatsApp group, and it's still going. Like we still have conversations almost every week.
yeah,
In there, and it's just the 12 people that went on that experience in Kenya, and
yeah, yeah,
it's great because people tend to meet new people. They tend to stay in touch with people. And what I found really, really heartwarming, lacking a better word, recently was, about this time last year, slightly earlier, we had our Portugal training camp under the Sweat Elite name. It was the last camp we had under the Sweat Elite name. And I noticed I can't get to Portugal right now because of the green card thing, and I'm here anyway for other reasons. But I noticed about 5 of the people that came on the Portugal camp went back again together this year on their own and did a little trip without any organization. They just went and
Yeah,
hung out and did running. And so it's really community building, and I think that's a big part of the reason why I enjoy them.
yeah. That is amazing, Matt. I think community and people doing things of a common interest. You know, sometimes we talk about, you know, mental health and well-being, but if someone, I mean, I've worked professionally in that field. If someone's doing something that they enjoy, or joy, if it brings you joy, that's all it needs. And it sounds like a lot of fun. I have met some people who've been on your camps in Kenya, and whenever they're telling me about it, they've got a big smile on their face. So that tells me that their memory is a happy memory of it. You know,
That's good to hear.
it is brilliant. That's why I wanted to ask you about it, Matt. So thank you so much for telling me that. But I'm sure a lot of people will be wanting to know the key thing. You know, if you're doing a marathon every month, and I have spoken to people, you know, you've probably heard of the 100 Marathon Club, where there's people done, you know, literally hundreds of marathons. And
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, there's the 100 Marathon Club. So they have a shirt and it will say 100. Most of these people now are in the 300s, 400s, 500s. There was one guy passed 1,000 marathons in sub 320. He's now in his 60s, so he's done over 1,000 marathons. So
I'm trying to do the math on how many that is every year. That's so many.
It's a lot.
Wow.
It is a lot. I mean, there was a friend of mine who done 2 this weekend, and there's also
wow.
And also
making me look like I'm soft.
Well, you know, I mean, they do run it at different paces, and some of them will joke with me saying, "Oh, I'm just out for another jog around London." You know, when they run London Marathon in like 4 hours, you know, and they do that every week, and which is quite incredible. But you know, there is different things, and I'm sure, you know, where there'll be, you know, I don't know whether Colin's watching this podcast, but you know, a friend of mine, Colin, he does unofficial marathons almost every other day. As part of his training. So he's at a different level. He's in his 50s and he's got an amazing strength and endurance, but his brother doesn't do that. So again, it's different things. But what do you do in terms of eating, drinking? Do you do specific trainings? Because I asked this one guy, I said, what training do you do if you're running a marathon every week? He said, I'm not doing any training. He said, now I know you're at the competing level. So for him, it's about just finishing. For you, it's about trying to get those times and stuff. He said he doesn't do any specific training during the week because he's recovering, and with his work being so manual, I think he's an electrician or plumber. So it's very manual work during the week, every week. He doesn't have time to train. So he just runs the marathons or 2 marathons at the weekends. What does your training week look like to prepare for these? Because we talk about taper, you know, because if we were tapering for 3 weeks, you're literally tapering, racing, rest, taper, race, rest. It doesn't work that way, does it, Matt? So what does a typical week look like for you?
Well, you first have to think about how much time do you have between marathon A and B. And A and B means the one you just ran, and B is the one that's coming up. And between Chicago and Indy, there was 4 weeks, and then there was 4 weeks between Indy and CIM, and then there was 6 weeks between CIM and Houston, and now I have 5 weeks in between Houston and Osaka. But they all pretty much have the same overall principle, and it's that I had take 4 or 5 days completely off after every one. Now, some people argue that's not the best thing because there's evidence to show, and I know Eliud Kipchoge does this, is that they do an easy run the day or 2 after the race and then they rest. I've found that doesn't really help me, and I've found that walking is just as helpful if I walk for about an hour. So in those 4 days, I tend to walk for an hour, but it's not really a specific walk. It's just like walking my dog. Like I'll stop and stuff. It's not like a power walk. It's literally just to move my legs. So I'm not trying to go any pace or any heart rate. Walk. Like literally just like try and get 8,000.
Like a stroll.
Yeah. And then I will go into a phase of however long I have through until 1 week to go. I tend to do a 7-day taper, which is shorter than most, but I've always done that. I experimented with doing longer tapers. I don't feel like they really work that well. 7 to 10 days. And so then I train from the end of that 4 to 5 day recovery period through until that taper starts again. And usually the 4 to 5 day recovery period allows me to fully recover muscularly, but I noticed that the central nervous system and just sort of like my immune system hasn't quite recovered. So the first 2 to 4 days of getting back into training, which is just passed because I'm now 8 days past Houston, those sort of day 5, 6, 7, 8 is tend to be just sort of like moderate training. So I'll do maybe like for example, 2 days ago, I did a 15K run steady at about 340 a K, which is 555 a mile, which is obviously quite a long way from my marathon pace, but I'm just sort of running at about 50% effort or 60% effort.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's really a training block of 2 to 3 weeks, however long I have, where I'll try and touch on every system that I need. So hill sprints, that's really high-end anaerobic. I'll try and touch on mile pace because I get a lot of benefit out of doing mile pace work. So ironically, after this podcast, I have a mile pace workout. I have 10 400s at about my mile effort, which is about 63, 64, because that's about a 410, 412 mile.
Yeah.
And then I'll make sure I tick off a threshold session, an LT2 threshold session, and then also an LT1 threshold session, which is sort of marathon pace. And so I'll really sort of go, what are the boxes I need to tick in between marathon A and marathon B, and try and tick them as much as I can with enough recovery in between each one. And I really learned in the last block between CIM and Houston that I probably overdid it a little bit. I probably did a little bit too much because at Houston, I didn't feel quite as fresh and as poppy, you might want to say, in the legs as normal. And so I'm actually going to reduce. I'm not necessarily going to do less amount of hard workouts, but in the hard workouts, I'm going to do a little bit less volume. So I would have typically done 15 400s probably. So now I'm going to do 10. And I would typically have done maybe 12 by a K at threshold. I'll do 8 this cycle. So I'm just going to, and my gut feeling just says that's what I need to do. I'm not sure because I'm still learning and I'm still figuring this out. But that's the basic, strategy here. And once I get to about 7, 8 days out, I start to reduce volume and reduce, intensity, and I do my typical taper week, which is pretty straightforward. A lot of 10K easy runs and one workout of 5 by 1K at marathon pace, which is pretty short workout. So yeah, that's really it.
It sounds when you say you mentioned the word feel, see how you feel. Do you work on feel, or do you use technology to tell you if there's anything happening or not happening?
I don't use a lot of technology, but I'm not against it. I think that feel trumps all. It always does, and I think it always will, because a lot of the data that at least comes out of the watches is not very accurate. I think the Whoop ring, I haven't tried it before, but I believe that's a lot better. And so I think that understanding your HRV and sleep scores via the ring may be better. But I still think I can't get away from the whole idea of if you're really in tune with your feel and you can really monitor that well, that's always going to trump everything. Because I have heard of people that their ring tells them that they're all good, but then they feel bad. And I just think, isn't the feeling really the most important thing? And so a lot of these things are based on how I feel day to day. And I will change things. For example, if I warm up today and I just generally feel really rough, I will make a quick decision and I'll go, okay, is it better for me to just do an easy run today? Or maybe I could even do the threshold session today and the mile pace stuff later, because the threshold session isn't going to be anywhere near as fast as the mile session. Because think about it, if I do 8 by a K at LT2 threshold, that might be 8 by a K in about 305, which is much slower pace than the mile repeats I have today, which is at like 240 a K, because they're only 500, 400 meter reps. And so I'll think about those sorts of things. I'll go, okay, maybe I'm not feeling quite good enough to be running 240 a K, so maybe I'll do threshold. But if I feel horrendous warming up, I'll probably just do a 10-mile easy run and then reassess. So it's really important to listen to your body now, because if you don't, you're asking for an injury, basically.
Yeah. I mean, you've basically got what I would call a menu of workouts, and you are literally juggling them on the fly based on how you feel.
Exactly. You've described it better than I could have. Yeah.
Which is brilliant, which I try and teach my athletes that. And obviously you say, you've got, you mix and match how you feel, because everyone has different workouts, everyone travels different ways, different jobs. But it sounds absolutely brilliant in terms of what you're doing, Matt. I was going to say, what is your main go-to meal recovery? I mean, once you've done your workouts, do you tend to take, protein powders or stuff, or are you more just real foods as and when you take it in to recover?
A bit of both, but the most common thing I've been having after workouts is just, and this is a pretty common thing, it's just a smoothie. I haven't been a big smoothie person up until recently. My wife got me into them. But yeah, I tend to load it up with protein powder, creatine, a whole lot of berries and, cherries and all these. I've got this berry mix that I buy from one of the supermarkets here. And then I also put peanut butter and
throw it all in
there. Throw everything in there, grapes, the whole lot, yeah. And then typically after that, I'll normally have. I really lean on really simple meals like chicken and rice, like Japanese style,
Mhm.
just
Yeah,
very basic chicken with white rice, because that ticks. It's such a perfect meal for runners when you
yeah,
think about it, because it ticks the box of just protein and carbs and not much else.
yeah.
And so I'll tend to do a lot of chicken and rice as well after workouts. So yeah, I do take the
Excellent.
diet pretty strictly, especially in the last year, and that was as a result of realizing if I wanted to lose the weight, I have to understand how weight loss works. And anyone that starts to look into weight loss understands that it's predominantly about the diet.
Yeah, and the beauty is that it is that simple. You know, people might sort of scoff, oh, you know, just rice and that. It does, you know, but as I say, it ticks all the boxes for me. You know, instead of rice, pasta or pizza.
Mm.
You know, so obviously depending on the types of things as well, but it is that simple. I was going to say, Matt, we could talk for hours and hours. We're sort of coming to an end, really, in terms of the length on this podcast. All I can say is thank you so much for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge. I'm looking forward to seeing how you progress over the next sort of 5-6 months. We'll bring you back on, I'm sure, once you've run the
Yeah.
215, 216. But I wish you all the best in Arizona. And as I say, with Globe Runners, you know, a new venture, you know, starting new businesses can be really challenging, difficult. So you're starting a new business and you're continuing your journey trying to break these amazing marathon times. It's quite incredible. It's a credit to you, your wife, and the whole thing that you're doing. It's amazing. I've loved chatting to you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Naso. I'm more than happy to come on anytime, and I appreciate the interest. And yeah, looking forward to reconnecting after hopefully a couple of faster marathons coming up soon.
Absolutely, Matt. All I can say is have a great time in Arizona and look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you so much again. All the best, mate. Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Here we go.